Discover the story of Arkady Fidler, a fearless traveler, wartime writer, and a true citizen of the world. In this episode, we dive into the life of a man who crossed continents, fought with words during World War II, and inspired generations through his books. We'll also take you to his unique museum in Puszczykowo, Poland, a place filled with tribal masks, jungle stories, and the spirit of adventure. Even if you've never heard his name, his story speaks a universal language of courage, curiosity, and compassion. Join us and let the journey begin. History is closer than you think. Arkady Fidler, a traveler who wasn't afraid to dream. In a world that becomes more digital with each passing day, where we explore the globe's corners more often through a screen than with our own eyes, the figure of Arkady Fidler serves as a reminder that true journeys begin not with a ticket, but with the courage to set off. Arkady Fidler is a legendary figure, a traveler, reporter, environmentalist, and tireless popularizer of knowledge about the world. Born in Poznan in 1894, he spent his entire life traversing the globe, visiting places that most of his compatriots could only dream of. In times when travel took weeks and contact with the world was lost at the edge of the jungle, he set off with a notebook, camera, and an open heart. Books that awakened the imagination. His most famous works, such as The Fish Sing in Ukajali and Canada Scented with Resin, are literary journeys that shaped the imagination of several generations of Poles. Fidler wrote lightly, but with immense knowledge and empathy. In his accounts, he described not only landscapes and adventures but, above all, people, their customs, everyday life, and what connects us all regardless of latitude. In The Fish Sing in Ukajali, he took us to the heart of the Amazon, showing the life of the Indians, the struggle for survival, but also the poetry of nature. He wrote, "In the jungle, there is no time. There is only rhythm, the rhythm of life and death. And you must attune yourself to it." In turn, Wild Bananas, and Little Bison with a Wound on His Muzzle, are books full of respect for the indigenous people of America, often marginalized, but for Fidler, fascinating and worthy of deep understanding. Quotes that inspire travelers. Although Fidler did not cycle thousands of kilometers like many contemporary travelers, his words can be a source of extraordinary inspiration for us, lovers of bicycle expeditions. He wrote, "It's not about conquering the world, but about understanding it." This sentence is worth taking with you on every journey, regardless of whether you are riding through the Andean passes or gravel roads through Silesia, Malopolska, or the Bieszczady Mountains. Every road can be a pretext for discovery, not only of the landscape but also of oneself. Fidler's spirit in our times. The house of Arkady Fidler in Puszczykowo near Poznan is now a museum of his life and spiritual journey. There, you can see a replica of Christopher Columbus's ship Santa Maria, African masks, Native American totems, and photographs from his expeditions. It's a place that shows that traveling is not a matter of budget or fashion, but of passion. In the world of cycling adventures, where every climb and every kilometer counts, Fidler reminds us, it's worth stopping sometimes. To look someone in the eye, to hear the story of a resident of a passing village, to read a local legend. Because a journey that leaves no trace in us is just moving from one place to another. For me, and perhaps for you too, Fidler is a patron of conscious travel. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't judge, but absorbs. And teaches that the world, even the closest part of it, can be discovered endlessly. Arkady Fidler was more than a writer and explorer. He was a witness to history, and a storyteller in the time of war. When World War II began, he left occupied Poland and joined the Polish forces in exile. In 1940, he arrived in Britain, where he met the pilots of the 303 Squadron. A legendary Polish unit fighting in the Battle of Britain. Fidler lived among them. He listened to their stories, their hopes, their fears. And then, he wrote. His book, Squadron 303, told the world about their bravery. About young men who risked everything for freedom. It wasn't just a book, it was a message of hope. It was smuggled into occupied Poland. Read in secret by those who needed to believe that Poland still fought on. Through his words, Fidler gave people strength. He didn't carry a weapon, but he fought, with truth, with courage, with heart. After the war, he returned to exploring the world. But the stories of the pilots stayed with him. And with all of us. Arkady Fidler showed that sometimes, the greatest battles are won by those who choose to remember.